Well, we know they exist, right? Parent-teacher organizations exist. Granted, during the pandemic, everything's been screwed up in our school systems anyway right now. But maybe, and guys, I'm going to throw it out there. Maybe that's something Pro Cannabis Media could do, is put together a room of medical doctors, nurses, and those who have experience with this plant to talk to parents. The old how to talk to your children about drugs and alcohol. Seems to me we can have those conversations now. We've certainly got enough, even though we need more research. I get that. But it is a challenge. Look, parenting, how many of us are parents? Okay. It's the most challenging job we ever have had. Right, Paul?
You got it.
I think you guys are right, though, because I think in this situation, there's still a lot of people over a certain age where there's a big stigma against cannabis. I see it with my parents. My parents both have major medical conditions. I've tried to get them to try medicinal marijuana. I've talked to people I know in the industry that are experts in it. They've offered to get on calls with them, and they won't do it because they look at cannabis as the 60s or the flower children, and that's what their perception of it is or worse. So I actually think Rob's got a great idea in terms of teaching the parents. But I think by teaching the kids and using the kids to teach the parents is actually a great way to do it as well.
I will tell you this, guys. Kids know more about it than the parents do. Okay?
No doubt.
And if you don't believe that, be a kid again. Because I knew more. Look, it's not even worth looking at my own personal experience because I was an ADHD boy being boy, right? And the only time I could hyper focus in school was, guess what? When I used it before school. Oh, really? I'm not proud of that. And I'm not saying that anybody who knows me knows I might be a little off. Okay, I get it. But you know what? I was a functioning member of society for the last 30 or 40 years. Some might debate that too. But for the most part, my point is there are opportunities here that I don't think the industry is taking advantage of. And it's something that it's one of the reasons why I started this company in the first place, is to tell the stories of the industry, to tell the stories of the people who say, you know what, cannabis saved my kid's life. You know how many are out there?
Oh, what?
Thousands. Okay.
There's a lot of heartwarming stories that way.
Dan, do you do that when you're writing? How many times have you heard that quote? Cannabis has saved my life. Cannabis has changed my life.
Oh yeah, it's such great stories. Like especially some people here in New Jersey. We have Marijuana Mommy of Under Jesse Gill has a really great story like that. My friend CMMJ, remember Mike Brennan's great story about that he had like severe back pain. He was on opioids that he could barely function, and then with cannabis, now he's around. He travels. We went to Washington to Normal together. He's an active guy that way. And Jesse has a very similar story. It's really this is why I feel like the government has lied to us. This is like NAM. If you want to have reference from the 60s, they lied to us about NAM in the Pentagon Papers, lied to us about cannabis. What else are they lying about? This is a plan that helps people. So I have ADD myself, for example. I'm looking for something that would help that. I haven't found that. I have found something for my stomach. It's another. I'm a chronic patient. I'm not I'm not a patient without myself that way, but it is one of those issues where it should be.
Right.
I think, look, you can never have enough education. I feel like I've spent the better part of my last 4 years running around the state of New Jersey trying to educate legislators. Apparently not well enough because they're all calling Rob with some cannabis. I don't even know if it's cannabis 101. It sounds like it's cannabis preschool type questions. Right. But municipal officials and I Jimmy, I'm entirely on board with you that the notion of more deliberate education targeted at each of these audiences is really critical. I think the industry itself is a little bit constrained on kind of two fronts, because certainly when it comes to educating towards minors, there are very clear limitations on their ability to advertise and to spend money communicating on anything that's targeted towards a minor. Right. So efforts by organizations like PCM, by folks like Rob and Stockton, serving as a resource to parents, to teachers, to schools is hugely important. And I'll tell you what the most undereducated segment of the entire population is of all of them: doctors.
Oh, and on that note, the Massachusetts Medical Society recently, within the last few weeks, has taken the word marijuana out and replaced it with cannabis, and is now recognizing it as a medicinal product in Massachusetts.
That's great.
So that's huge. And I will tell you, sure enough, the medical community, the medical cannabis community, some of them may have missed that little item in the paper, but we actually had Dr. Eric Ruby on, a very well recognized and respected pediatrician who was the only pediatrician in the state of Massachusetts who could actually prescribe medical cannabis to under 21-year-old kids who were sick. Okay. And he just retired. So you can imagine what's going on now if you're a parent of a child who needs this as its medicine. And it is plant medicine. I don't even like to refer to it as a drug. I really don't. It's a plant medicine. If we could have plant diets, okay, and I'm surrounded by vegans in my personal world, okay? I'm surrounded by them. I get it, okay? But we have to put it in front of the public, because that stigma is there, and it's never coming down until those that believe in reefer madness are going to hear about the research, these anecdotal stories that are so important to tell. Is there any New Jersey media that actually tells positive, as a cannabis reporter, or tells the positive? Who's that?
Well, Dan obviously is out there doing a lot of work on it, but right. We I guess our leading newspaper used to be called the Star Ledger. Now it goes under NJ.com. They have they set up about 2 years ago a subscription service called Cannabis Insider that is extensively covering the industry. And although they are behind a paywall, I think most of their articles tend to come up, kind of go across and become free about a week or so after they're on the subscription service. And so there certainly has been pretty good coverage from one of our leading outlets. Our other newspapers certainly, see that it's a big thing. Many of them are more focused on kind of, to the extent that they have the staffing to even do it these days, what's happening in various towns at the local level, and that's after the doctors. That's really the next place where in New Jersey, and I'm sure everywhere else, the success of these programs is really going to be borne out, because we talked before about the timing on when's it going to be that we can get these adult use stores open. Once the governor signs that bill, that's great and that's fine, but guess what? We got to go out and convince every single town, not every town, but we got to go out and convince the local officials to allow adult use in their towns. And I will tell you that I am sitting here talking with municipal officials now, municipal officials who in their town, 67% of the people voted in favor of this referendum. And they are I will just say they are concerned and reluctant to allow existing medical cannabis dispensaries to go adult use in their towns, even though they've had these dispensaries in their towns for several years now without any incident.
Interesting. That's the NIMBY group. They're not in my backyard.
It's great to have it in Newark. It's great to have it in Patterson. Keep it out of my town.
Yeah. And yet they have a medicinal dispensary, which, okay, I get it. Look, there's 91% in the most recent poll recognize that cannabis has medicinal qualities. Okay, so that should be a majority last time I checked, but it still is not getting into these towns. Now, David had some experience with these host agreements Paul, that he can share, because you guys in New Jersey are going to go through this now, dealing with these NIMBYs. David, when you went before town councils, how much education did you have to do at that level?
Oh, there's a lot. I mean, and you still have to do that even today. You got to remember, if you're into the industry, you're reading about it. Like Paul said, you're getting behind the paywall and you're staying up to date. You're hearing what Dan has to say, listening to people like Rob, going to people like Rick for advice, and you know it. But if you're running a municipality, marijuana is just a sideshow. It's really not what running the municipality is about. It's just one small issue that's all of a sudden getting a lot of, not even a lot, it's getting some airplay. But you've got all kinds of problems. You got municipal problems, you got COVID, schools, and then you got a deluge of people who want to come in. You got 40 people competing for the 2 store locations that you're going to allow, and it becomes overwhelming. And if you don't take I try to approach it from the angle of, if I was sitting on a municipal board, what would I really want to hear? I don't want to hear about what the interior of your store is going to look like. I want to hear about what's the impact upon the community, positive, negative. What are you going to do to avoid it? Are you going to create jobs? Are you going to create tax revenue? And then tell us the things that everybody's worried about and explain it a little clearer. And I found that when you do that, the municipalities, appreciate it and they tend to respond better. But we don't know what New Jersey's, right? They haven't put the regulations together. So you don't know how much local control there's going to be. If they look up at Massachusetts, hopefully they're not going to do what we did. I mean, that we're very provincial up here, very colonial. So the local municipalities have to have a big say in anything that goes on. But the flip side is they've made it so difficult. The whole host community agreement process is excruciating.
Do they ask in New Jersey, any of you guys, before you even apply for a license, do you have to have a location under agreement, a lease? Rick, LaNeve?
Signed. The lease signed.
That's a problem. That's a major, I've written a lot about that. That means that your industry is going to be controlled by the landlords, and that the people who've got the most money who can lock, right? Paul, you said that you've got medical applicants that have been sitting since 2019 and now have sued the state, and their case is coming up, but they need to get those applications moving before anything else happens. Well, if that's the case, right, you got to have deep pockets. If you've got a lease and you've been paying on that space since 2019, you got a year and a half of rent. And it's probably rent in some nice locations. And because you mentioned the word marijuana or cannabis, all of a sudden the rent gets jacked up by anywhere from 20 to 50%. And if it's a really great location, it can get jacked up by a multiple of the regular rent. You have to have deep pockets. And that's what marginalizes a lot of the social equity applicants and a lot of the smaller operators. Right. So
and David, the other wrinkle as far as real estate goes is you have to find a place that's not owned by a federal bank, because they're not going to let you do the lease. So it has to be private, or it has to be local. You have to own it outright. And then New Jersey is the most densely populated state. So you have to have a place that's 1,000 feet away from schools, daycare centers, pools, libraries, churches. I mean, the list goes on and on. As I've told Jimmy before, mentioned that there are some municipalities in New Jersey, because we have more than 450, that you can take the tape measure 1,000 feet from any of those places, and there is nowhere to build anything. So some places get taken off the list right away, and then you have the NIMBYs, you have the zoning, you have the prices. I mean, it's just, I don't know how some people even get this started unless you are an MSO and can kind of really wait it out and have good connections.
Yeah, that's what people really don't like, and is really like unfortunate. Like, instead of like the local entrepreneur, for example, and it really is difficult, like in these towns. Like so, just this week, I wrote that Red Bank was like for it, but they couldn't find the right location, and Bayonne and Asbury Park aren't going to move on the regulations on the local level because we're in this gray area on the state level.
Yeah, and going back to one of the earlier points too, is the last in-person conference I was at here in New Jersey, which was probably about a year ago at this point in time. The number they were throwing around was, in order to even think about trying to apply for a license, you got to have 10 to 15 million ready to go. But that's the number I kept hearing, between the lawyers, the accountants, the lobbyists, the leasing you have to have ready in place to just hold on to the land for so long. It's not, your mom and pops.
For cultivation, I think that number is right. You know, my gut and what I tell folks who just want to do a dispensary is it's still a big number. And I think you're looking at a bare minimum of $500,000. But if you are really, prepared to wait to really do it right, you probably need closer to $1 million, so somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million.
Yeah.
Is really what you're looking at just to do a simple dispensary license. And, that's why it's so important. David, you were speaking to the social equity component here. One of the things that we've been working on, and I've been working on with State Senator Troy Singleton, is a fund mechanism that would allow MSOs and others to fund and to bring in funding for the social equity applicants, for minority women and disabled veteran-owned businesses, to provide them with low-cost capital and the technical background and the sort of information that you need and the knowledge to how to deal with municipalities, how to make that deal work with the town, that so many people who have not gone through the process, who haven't developed real estate, who haven't tried to get, look, I'm in a state where a Wawa convenience store can take 3 to 4 years just to get through the land use process. And that's putting it where an old gas station used to be. We're not talking about knocking down someone's house to put in a big gas station. We're talking about converting something. So, it's a here in New Jersey, it's not for the faint of heart. But the good news is, I think that the bill does certainly have provisions in there to provide New Jersey individuals the opportunity to participate in these groups. It will be something that will be important in the application scoring. So that certainly is a plus. But for the mom and pop, who doesn't have a source of equity, who doesn't have a lot of experience in real estate development, it's a daunting challenge in a state like New Jersey.
Hey, if you want to find a dispensary in Massachusetts, just find the power lines and follow the power lines, because they're always on the outskirts of the city, and that's where a lot of these towns put these dispensaries, because they don't want it on Main Street. They're NIMBYs, not in my backyard, not on Main Street, but we'll put them out by the power lines.
So I'll tell you, Paul, I'll make an add-on comment to that. If they're going to rely upon the MSOs to fund the smaller operators, I think what they're going to find, ultimately, it's going to fail miserably. The MSOs do a wonderful job beating their chest and saying, we're all for social equity. But if there's any place in the country where there's a test case on that, it's right here in Massachusetts. The social equity program has not really gotten off the ground for a whole host of reasons, including this host community agreement issue and the landlords and access to capital. So the Cannabis Control Commission decided we're going to finally roll out the home delivery license, and we're going to restrict it to social equity and economic empowerment applicants for 3 years. And no sooner had the smaller operators started to approach the retailers to say, I want to be your home delivery agent, that the retailers started to take huge advantage of them. Things like, you can't deliver for anybody else, or you got to give me some stock in your business for free, or I've got to have the right to buy you out after the exclusivity period is over, right? So a group went back to the commission, and the commission decided to set up a whole new license class. It's like a mini Amazon. So you can buy product at wholesale, keep it in your facility. Customers can't walk in, but they can order online, and then you home deliver it. That was the Commonwealth Dispensary Association, made up of the largest vertically integrated players, has now sued the commission to try to knock that license out. And there are some members who are leaving the CDA over it. The CDA has now taken their list down of who their members are. You can't find it anymore. Fortunately, it's been scraped and people are circulating it. But the big players love to beat their chest about how they want to help social equity. But when the rubber meets the road, they do everything they can to sabotage it. They would crush social equity like a bug if they could.
Doesn't that reflect the history of the United States, basically, when it comes to capitalism and keeping?
Well, it reflects the history of capitalism. It's greed. And if anybody remembers good old Gordon Gekko, you know why it is like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about that. We've had similar issues in New Jersey, and a lot of people hold similar sentiments about some of those MSOs in Massachusetts are most likely MSOs here in New Jersey, or
Right.
at least want to be. So, and people have been talking about, like, that's why we need social equity. And in part, our desire to have a socially just industry may have held up like the whole process, but in the end, it's worth it, because a lot of this, unfortunately, what drove industry or legalization initially was not like this push exactly. And it's been really hard to have like a socially just industry. But S21 though has a lot of great provisions, and people expect that the commissioner chair, Dinah Waynu, in her background as the former ACLU lobbyist on this, would take these principles to heart when like implementing this, which makes it all the worse that we're stuck in limbo.
Pro Cannabis Media programming is available live and on demand on our Facebook page at Pro Canna Media, on Instagram at Pro Cannabis Media, on LinkedIn also at Pro Cannabis Media, on YouTube and YouTube Live on Pro Cannabis Media, Twitter at Pro Canna Media, and on twitch.tv/Pro Cannabis Media. So like, share, and subscribe to all of our content, newsletters, and shows live or on demand.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.